Kia ora koutou katoa, tēnā koutou raurangatira mā, hui no mai tēnei, hui nau mai haere mai I ki te kaupapa o te rā. Nō reira, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou katoa. Welcome and alofa everyone. It's great to see such a large turnout to hear from our guests today. I want to acknowledge and thank you for your attendance. For those who don't know me, my name is Sua Kevin Thompson. I'm from the Treasury, and I will be your facilitator for our session today. I would like to now introduce to you Paul Retimanu, who will be speaking to us today. Paul is the Director of Manaaki Management and has been heavily involved in the hospitality sector over the last 30 years. He is also the co-chair of the Wellington Te Awa Māori and Pacific Business Network and is represented on a number of boards that have supported better outcomes for Māori and Pacific rangatahi in entrepreneurship and education. Paul will talk to us today about his journey as a Pacific entrepreneur and the role and contribution of the Māori and Pacific Business Network during these difficult times. He will also talk to us today about the challenges facing Pacific business people, including the impact of the pandemic on Pacific businesses, the lessons learned, the different ways in which business have responded to the pandemic, and he will reflect on the impact of government support packages on members of the network. In his delivery, Paul will reflect on his own personal experiences as a prominent business person in his own right, and the feedback and observations he has acquired through his leadership role within the Wellington Māori and Pacific Business Network. As he talks, can I please ask that you enter your questions on our chat page, and at the end of Paul's delivery, I will invite Paul to respond to your questions and comments. Additionally, if you could indicate by a thumbs up if there is a question that you particularly keen to hear answers on. And now I would like to also advise you that this session is being recorded for sending out should you require it. Now I want to pass it over to you, Paul. Ioma mana.
Oh, kia ora koutou katoa, alofa lava. Thank you very much for that, Sue. And look, appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here in front of such an esteemed guest list as yourselves, and obviously an opportunity to be able to share some of our stories, obviously with the decision makers within our bureaucracy here in this country. But look, happy days today in Wellington on Tuesday. It's actually my wife's birthday today, so the best thing that I did today was I woke up this morning and the first thing that crossed my mind was that it was her birthday, and my first words uttered out of my mouth was happy birthday to my darling, and so I did very, very well in that. But look, as Sue mentioned, look, I'm just going to touch on a couple of things. I thought I'd do a bit of an intro, just a bit of my life story, where I come from. I thought I might touch on the the Te Awa Māori Business Network and the Pacifica Business Network that we started here. Just touch on also just around the COVID from the first and the second lockdown here that we've experienced through to going through Omicron, and then perhaps just some of the things that our membership and our businesses are going through as of now. But I suppose the question I wanted to pose right at the start is, how do we grow that Pacifica and that Māori businesses to be able to grow within this country? And I think a question or a thing that resonates with me as I think about that is around those core values, how different they can be for us. In mainstream, how do we measure a successful business? In mainstream, we look at a balance sheet, and that tells us whether or not it's a successful business or it's not, or however the longevity of that's going to be. From a Pacifica or a Māori business lens, as we look at it and say, well, how can we help grow our people? How can we make this particular business intergenerational? And that's what our key focus is. Unfortunately, the two measurements are very, very different from each other. And the success in mainstream is seen as that. In our people's eyes, it's seen as, well, how do we help our people get further where they can in life? And a lot of that's based on inputs as opposed to outputs. So my talanoa today, I'm hoping that you'll basically reflect on some of those things, and I'm hoping some of those core values that we've brought into our businesses that perhaps you might be able to see how they thread through, but the importance of those core values that they are for us here today. So as Saul mentioned, I'm Paul Retimanu. I'm Southern born and bred from Invercargill. I'm the youngest child of Whipe and Whapapa Retimanu, who came to New Zealand from Samoa back in the late 50s. My parents from the villages in Western Samoa of Whastotei, Whangamalu, and my parents came here sort of around that promise of a better life. They met on the boat on the way over from Samoa, and they landed in Auckland, and my father was promised a job down at the Ocean Beach Freezing Works down in Bluff. So he went down there, worked the first season, earned enough money, went back to Auckland, married my mother, and then they moved down to Bluff. And that's where my siblings and I were all, well, my older brother and sister were born in Bluff, and then my next sister and myself were born in Invercargill, which for those of you who know South Island well, it's probably only 20 minutes away. So yeah, we ended up in Invercargill of all places. Unusual for a Pacific Island family to be brought up, which a lot of people think, but actually it was quite a big community down there of our people, because obviously it was quite blue collar. You know, there was 4 freezing works, you had the oyster boats, the fertilizer farming, so there was a lot of opportunity for work for our people. So that's where my parents started, and then we all went to school down there. Had a great, very fortunate, had a great upbringing. We were very, very lucky, and in the sense of having some fantastic friends, and it was quite a melting pot, quite a diverse group of friends that I grew up with, and whom I'm still friends with to this day. And probably what I like about it, and I think back and I reflect back on the friendships that I've made that are lifelong, you know, just the diversity of that friendships. You know, I was the only Pacific Islander. We had 3 Māori, and then probably 5 Pākehā, and there was a group of us, and we're still friends now. And it was quite a diverse group, bringing different values, but friendship was very, very important to all of us. When I was being the youngest of a Pacific Island family, and for a lot of you on this webinar, you'll be well aware, as the youngest, you are the person who makes the cups of tea when visitors come, and that was pretty much my role. So funnily enough, me getting into hospitality probably is no surprise. I think I was sort of modelled to be able to do that. So at a very young age, I was the cup of tea person and the hospitality person to be able to ensure that the mana of my parents was always upheld when we had guests that came to our whare at that time. So when I left school, I didn't want to stay in Invercargill. I sort of wanted to move north, which I did. I didn't want to go to university. I didn't want to go to university like a lot of my friends did. They all went to Dunedin, went to Otago. So I decided to go to Christchurch and did trade training, which I did, and I became a welder by trade. I went to a Māori hostel, which is called Te Kohanga Trade Training Hostel, and I became a welder by trade. I wasn't very good at it, to be fair. So when I finished doing my trade after 12 months, I went knocking on doors to find a job, and I built horse floats and boat trailers. And I sort of told the guy, it was Bright Forward Trailers, I remember to this day. And I remember I knocked on his door and I told him I was this whiz-bang welder. I'd just done my tickets, and I'd been trained for 12 months, so I'll be really, really good. And of course, he gave me the job, and I was terrible. It took me 10 times longer to make a trailer. I think I only made 1, actually. And then I was, he decided to have a wee word with me and let me go, which is probably the best decision ever. So at that point, that's how I sort of got into hospo. Started working in hotels. I met my wife, Kerry. We met in Christchurch at the Airport Travel Lodge, and we worked in hospitality there. And then about 30 years ago, we decided to move to Wellington, which is where we are now, and we've been here for 30 years. Kerry, my wife, is Ngāpuhi, from the top of the north. And her father, Cedric, is Palangi, and he was in the Air Force in the day, so they sort of moved around New Zealand. So look, when we moved to Wellington, fortunate enough to be within hotels. I was at the Intercontinental, which back in the day, back in 1991 when we moved here, was the Park Royal Hotel. So I was moved into conferencing. I was the conference manager there. Really enjoyed it. Hospitality was my thing. I was very, very good at it. And after about 5 years, I was doing really, really long hours at the time. And I remember, I'd start very, very early at like 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning and go through till 8 o'clock was an early day. And I sort of thought to myself, gee, I don't know if I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. So in 98, I decided to get out, and my wife and I, Kerry, we decided to do our own thing. And that's when we set up a catering company. We're very fortunate, actually, when I think about it. My wife and I have been in business now since 98. So according to my maths, if I worked out, 24 years. And we're incredibly fortunate that we've got really complementary skills. We sort of stay in our lanes, I suppose. What my wife is very, very good at is systems and process and detail. I'm not that guy. I'm very good at sort of building relationships and building team, and that's what I do. And our company back then was KPR Catering, Care and Paul Retimanu. I know there's a very that was all we could come up with at the time. And we set up this catering company, and funnily enough, there was 3 of us. There was a chef, Kerry and I, because neither of us could cook, so we probably need a chef. That would be a good thing. And funnily enough, Pacific Business Trust were kind enough to give us a loan to start us off, which my mother used her house to basically use as collateral for that loan. And the funny thing is, about 4 months ago, just got on the board of Pacific Business Trust, so it's sort of gone full circle for me there. So that's how we started into business. We were fortunate enough that our mother had a house, And I probably want to touch on that because I think that's an area that stymies our people to get into business. And I'll touch on that a little bit further on. So, yeah, look, we've been in business since 98, and then we sort of grew our business, probably grew it to about, I don't know, probably about 30 or 40 staff. It was going pretty well. We were doing out catering, predominantly to government departments and to corporates, because they were spending quite a significant amount of money on catering in those days. And then 2008 came and the GFC kicked in, the global financial crisis, and our business struggled. We held all the staff because I thought this probably won't last. I'm sure we can come back. And in hindsight, we probably shouldn't have. And long story short, probably about after 3 years trying to navigate our way through that, unfortunately, we couldn't. So the business unfortunately got let go and got liquidated. So we had to sort of start afresh. We were fortunate enough back at that time, because that would have been back in 2011, that one of our major clients was the local iwi. And at the time, they were just sort of building the whare here in Wellington. And I remember one of our first clients when we first started off, when there was just 3 of us, I remember I got a phone call. So this is back in probably year 2, year 3 of KPO. And I remember getting a phone call and an old fire there rang up, fire editing. And I remember her vividly. Unfortunately, she's passed away. And she rang us up and she says, "Oh, kia ora," and kia ora, fire, how are you? She goes, "Yeah, good. She goes, "I'd like to get some catering." I said, "Fantastic. Where are your people?" So I said, "Whereabouts are you based?" She told me Pipitea Street. So I raced up, had a hui, got on extremely well with all of them. I think we were sort of very like-minded and core values and everything. So we built this relationship where we did all their catering. Then what ended up happening from that was all of a sudden we became the fix-it people for them. And by that I mean about a month later I'd get a phone call from Italy and she'd ring me up. She goes, "Oh, kia ora, Paul. Oh, kia ora, how are you?" And she said, "Look, we want to take our people back to Taranaki to have a hui. We need a bus." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I'd get the yellow pages out because Google wasn't really used back then, back in 98, 99. So I'd get the yellow pages out, look up London bus services, ring it up, organise a bus. So that's what I did. Then the next month I'd get a phone call from Italy and she goes, "Oh, kia ora, Paul, kia ora, fine." She goes, "Look, our toilets are blocked." I went, "Oh, okay." She goes, "We need a plumber." I went, "No worries, leave it with me." Bear in mind I'm the caterer. So I'd bring up get out the yellow pages again, look up plumber, organise that. So effectively what ended up happening was through this relationship, they sort of came to us for anything they required and we just fixed it. And then back in 2009, when the local iwi, Port Nicholson Block Settlement Trust, got Pipitea Marae back as part of their settlement, the late Sir Paul Reeves and Sir Ngata Te Love rang me up and said, "Look, would you like to look after our marae and, bringing it up to spec and, doing a bit of investment in it?" So we're like, "Yep, great, perfect." So we ended up looking after Pipitea Marae and have done now since 2009, so for 13 years. And we've sort of managed that process of doing that up on behalf of the iwi. So they've spent about we're investing $3.5 million in that. And I know some of you probably through the protests over the last sort of 21 days would have seen that Pipitea Marae has been significant and obviously in fixing of the mana of Parliament of late. And when we did take over Pipitea Marae, when we took it over back in 2009, it was being used about 3 or 4 days a week, predominantly for iwi and for Ngāti Pōneti things. So, and then what we did do is we grew that business. So what ended up happening is pre-COVID, it was being used sort of 24 to 26 days a month. 50% of those would be used for commercial and 50% would be used for iwi. So we sort of commercialised and monetised it for them, which is great. And then of course in 2011, when whare waka came along, once again, the chairman at the time rang me up and said, "Look, we meet us down here. Would you like to look after this and run this for us and get this commercial operation up and running on our behalf?" So that's what we did. So my point to this, I suppose, that I'm trying to make is this relationship that we've had and that we've formed with the local iwi Port Nicholson Block Settlement Trust, Wellington Tenths and Palmerston North Reserves Trust over the last 20 odd years has sort of formed a relationship that's helped our business grow. And it's been incredibly good for us, but also we've been able to help grow that asset on their behalf as well. So it's been a nice reciprocal relationship and in a sense of our core values really aligned, which has been great. So yeah, look, I suppose in talking about where we've come from, our business model now, if we look at pre-COVID, if we go back to 2020, obviously things were going pretty gangbusters. We were doing really well. We would have had 100 odd staff. And then obviously we went through the last lot of lockdowns and with this COVID piece. But our business now, where are we at? Our model now is we look after Te Raukura, Te Whare Waka o Pōneke, the conferencing part. We have Kaka Cafe, which I know a lot of you, if you're from Wellington, would have been to. And that won Best Cafe of the Year last year in Aotearoa, which we're really proud of. We also obviously still look after Pipiti Marae, and then we also look after the Wellington Rowing Club. And then we also opened up a new cafe, Kawakawa Eatery, over in Berhampore just over a year ago. So our business model now, we've probably got about 60 staff now, of which in the full-time part, we've probably got about 40 to 50. Of that, 80% of Māori Pacifica rangatahi coming through. So really pleased about that. So Manaaki Management, which oversees all of that, is Kerry and my company. And as I said before, we've been going for a number of years now, and that's pretty much what we do, focusing on hospitality. Touching on the Māori and the Pacifica business networks, Te Awe Māori Business Network and Kia ora, I see there's a number of ex-members and people who actually started, and Matua Trevor Moaki's on here, and Matua set up Te Awe Māori Business Network 24 years ago. It's the longest running Māori business network in the country. And that was set up, as we know, with that sort of rural to urban shift. And we saw a lot of people coming into the cities. The business piece was sort of never there. A lot of our people came into government department jobs or banks or whatever it may be. But the business part was the one that everybody wanted to grow. So Te Awe came through 24 years ago, and the whole sort of ethos and the genesis of that was to help identify Māori business, but then also help grow that. And if we consider back to 24 years ago, that whole settlement process, it was all prior to that. So that was all sort of coming that way. So Te Awe sort of had a lot of members that are working in the government sector now that were part of helping grow this particular network. You know, I think of Pania Tyson Nathan, Richard Jones, Peter Johnston, Judge James Johnston. There's so many people that I can think of over the last 24 years who've contributed to helping get Te Awe to where it is today. And if I look at it today, we still have a database of about 400. We're still doing some incredible things. We have a chairman in Wayne Johnston, who's got quite an incredible sort of CV. He was vice president of South Pacific Tyres, Australasia Marketing. Jamie Williams, who's on our board there now, who's also got Kapura Hospitality Group, got 1,000 staff, 40 bars and restaurants around Wellington, Hamilton and Tauranga. And then we have Chad Johnston, who runs a number of the Regis Chain Hotel, but also regional manager for here in Wellington. So Te Awe's still doing what it does, 24 years on, wanting to do a bit more, and I'll probably reflect on that a bit further on down to where I talked to where we're at today. If I look at the Pacifica Business Network, the Wellington Pacifica Business Network, we've been going since 2014, so 8 years. And that started from the Honourable Lua Manavau Dame Winnie Laban having a tala noa with a number of us. And for those of you who will be familiar with Dame Winnie, she's very persuasive. When you have a meeting with her and when she says that she would like to set up a business network, there is no if, buts or maybes. We all have to just get in and get it done. And I'm really pleased that we did. Here we are 8 years on, and our membership there is growing. We've got a database 300. And what's been really encouraging, I think, when I think about the Wellington Pacifica Business Networks, in the last 8 years, we've had 3 Pacifica Business Awards here in the Wellington region. And it's been really exciting to see the maturity of some of those Pacifica businesses that have come through. You know, if I name a couple, you know, we've got Tyrone McCauley, one of the directors of Pickpock, the gaming company based here in Wellington. They've got 200 staff. Their company's global, done amazing things. You know, if I look at James Fruin, who has Wellington Pipelines based out in Wainui Mata here, James got a fantastic story. He's a guy who's part Samoan, part Māori, who loved driving tractors and big machinery. And he wanted to learn, how can I do this for a full-time gig? And he's done that. He's been going for 25 years out in Wainui, doing multi-million-dollar contract work out there. Luke Meredith, who set up companies, Circuit Systems, who's just sort of sold to private equity of late, but been going for 25 years, but really sort of footed it mainstream. So the Pacifica piece has been really amazing for me to be part of, because whilst I'm Samoan, I've done a lot in the Māori world, but not necessarily in our Pacifica world. And that's really come to the forefront in the last 8 years. And in particular, having these role models like the Honourable Lua Manavau Dame Winnie Laban, Sandy Antipas, Mel Harrington, a lot of these people that I've been able to fortunate enough to work alongside and help grow our Pacifica Business Network. And probably one of the highlights for us of late is that I know Lolu is on here, Mac and his team who've sort of see our vision and have come on board to help support us to be able to grow what we want to do. So that's been really exciting. So look, the networks are really important. I think they're incredibly important. As I say, I chair the Pacifica Business Network. I deputy chair the Māori Business Network. And I think in order for us to get where we need to get to with regards to wanting our business to grow, Pacifica, 1.6% of people in our Pacifica community own their own business or work themselves. If you look at New Zealand in general, it's about 8%. If you look at Asian and Māori, they're in double digits. We've got a long way to go, but we need to catch up. And these networks are really important to be able to help advocate that, but also to be able to show the channels of communication, that the connectivity that people need within business. Because let's be quite clear, business is incredibly tough. Even if we took COVID in the last 2 years out of the equation, business is incredibly tough. You know, you're wearing so many multiple hats, from finance through to HR, through to marketing, and all these sorts of things. And with business in New Zealand, and if I look at hospitality in particular, the bar is very low to get in. So, you know, you're learning as you go. You know, this sort of saying that everybody's been using, in particular during COVID, where, you know, you're building the plane while you're flying it. Well, business is very much similar to that in certain sectors in our country, which I believe. So, yeah, these are things that I think the business networks sort of achieve. If I think about COVID, and if I go back to 2020, I think back to my wife and I. Actually, we were overseas. We were in, it was the beginning of March 2020, so it was before we'd gone into lockdown. But COVID had started to rear its head, obviously, in January over in Wuhan, but then you started to slowly see it sort of come through the rest of the countries. But we were in Melbourne, we were overseas. We were there for a week. And I remember we were in a taxi and we were going from the airport into the city to a hotel just to check in. And I remember as we were going through the city, we pulled up. There wasn't a lot of people around. And I remember we pulled up at this intersection. And then looked to my left and at the lights, there was this guy standing there with this full PPE gear, overall things on, white freezing gum boots on. He had this full visor on. And I sort of looked at him and I thought, jeepers. And I said to the taxi driver, I said, what's that all about? And he said, oh, that's COVID. I said, what's that all about? He goes, well, he said, you know, all our people are working from home now, public transport, nobody's catching any transport, people aren't coming into the city. And I remember looking at that going, wow, that's incredible. This is just in Melbourne, 2.5 hours, 3 hours away from us. And as we were there for that week, it just dawned on me how serious it was over there, because we started to see, you know, shopkeepers were talking about how quiet it is, restaurants were doing the same and all the rest of it. Anyway, we came back to Wellington, landed, and we got back on a Monday. And I remember going into the office and I said to our sales director, and I said, hey, look, how are we looking at our bookings? Have we had any cancellations? So this is going back into week 2 of March. She goes, no, we hadn't had any. I went, oh, okay, that's good. So I was quite encouraged about that. And then by the time I got to Tuesday, she sort of mentioned to me as I arrived in the office, she goes, oh, just so you know, we had 2 cancellations today. I went, oh, okay, all right, just keep me updated. Anyway, long story short, by the end of that week, we got to 50 cancellations. So I knew things were going to come which weren't going to be great for us. So I was like, oh, shucks. So Kiri and I sort of sat down going, right, we're going to figure this out, you know, because there's more to come. That 50 cancellations sort of equated to about $400,000 worth of business for us in conferencing alone. That's without the cafe piece. So I knew we were going to have some headwinds coming. So we decided, okay, we're going to have to look at restructuring our business, looking at our staffing levels, all those sorts of things. I rang the bank and I said to our bank manager, I said, look, we're going to need a bit more of a facility on our overdrafts and so forth. I think we've got some significant challenges coming, which was great. So we lined all that up. I remember we spoke to some of our suppliers because it was before the 20th of the month. And we've been in business with these guys, 15 odd years. And I remember ringing them all up saying, look, 20th of the month, we're going to pay you 50% of whatever it is that we owe you. We can pay you the full lot, but we want to hold that because we don't know what's coming. They were all great. They were fantastic. They all bought into it and we did that. So we're sort of lining ourselves up. Then we started the restructure process with the staffing about, okay, let's have a look if we downsize. So we started doing that. At the same time, I was chairman of Wellington College at the time as well, which I'd been on the board for 6 years. And I remember it was a Friday and I rang our principal and I said, oh, whereabouts are you? And he said, oh, we're at a traditional up in Wanganui, Wanganui Collegiate. And I said, oh, okay. I said, we spoke about online learning last year. I said, did we do anything on that? And he goes, no, we didn't. And I said, okay. I said, where's your management team? And, you know, because we have 5 deputy principals. I said, where's the management team and everybody at the moment? And he goes, oh, everybody's back in Wellington, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, I really think we need to start triggering that online learning. We're in the middle of March now, so we're still a week and a half away from going into this lockdown on the 23rd. So he brought them all in that weekend, and we started doing online learning for Wellington College at that point because we could sort of start to see things were coming. Anyway, long story short, obviously we're aligning all our ducks up to basically, if we do go into lockdown, at least we've got cash reserves there to do whatever we need to do because we didn't know how this thing was going to play out. We got to the 23rd, obviously. 1 o'clock, Prime Minister comes out and explains we're at level 4. It took us about an hour to lock down all our buildings at that point and then send all our staff home. Interestingly enough, that day that she made that, we had 17 staff on that day and we took $250 through the tools. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out, you can start to see that decline really kick in. So if I think of COVID and that first lockdown back in 23 March 2020, it was just probably the biggest thing at that point was just that whole unknown fear, what are we walking into? But what we did have was the restructure that we'd started for the staffing piece, we could sort of put on ice because obviously what did come out was the wage subsidy, which helped us, which was great. And that was absolutely fantastic. And then of course the RSP to help us with those fixed costs. So there was things in place to be able to help us get through that next 4 weeks of lockdown. And then of course we get to level 3 and then level 2 before we got back to 1. But at least it gave us a bit of breathing space and a bit of time to be able to try and figure out what it is we're going to do. So you look, lockdown 1, whilst it was fairly severe, what we did notice was at least we had an opportunity to get through that. And then of course we started doing all those things that we didn't know, like click and collect and all these things. We weren't really set up for that, to be fair, and I think a lot of restaurants weren't, and cafes, to be fair. So a lot of them who did it on the first time around probably didn't do it the second time around because they realised actually level 3 doesn't help us. They didn't. But what we did notice though, after that first lockdown, we came back pretty fast and pretty well. Our turnovers sort of went a lot better than we thought with the domestic market. Obviously, you'll be well aware of the doom and gloom. Everybody thought, this thing's going to go long and hard. And, the things that are going to be coming at us are going to last a long, long time. Unemployment's going to get to double digits. And we all thought, 20% of our sector was going to go into receivership. Well, obviously that didn't happen. And after that first lockdown, it demonstrated that didn't happen. So that was a good thing. So everything came back, which was good. Then, of course, as we got through that, then Delta comes along last year. Obviously, Auckland, the impact was incredibly severe, and we saw that in particular in the CBD area and probably South Auckland with regards to the airport with the borders being closed. In Wellington here, we were probably fortunate enough that it was only for that 4-week period, and then we had that opportunity to come back as quick as we did again. We had a few good months, but I suppose the point that I'd like to make on this is, we're now into this COVID for over a year now. It's been going for a long time. We're now entered our 3rd year now of coming into this. It's been a long time. So when we got to the Delta, we thought we were sort of getting our heads above water. Wellington and the rest of the country in South Island, we thought, yeah, this is okay. Queenstown, major, obviously, because they were so far away, incredibly dependent on Auckland, but that wasn't going to happen after being locked down for 120 days. But again, we got through that. And then we were sort of fairly optimistic people, and then we get to the point where we are now, obviously, which is where this Omicron variant's kicked in. Omicron for us at the moment is really, really difficult because it's long and slow. I mean, we are in the hands of consumer confidence now, and that's all the services sector. So if you look at retail, tourism, international students, hospitality, it's all around that fear of going out, which is what's obviously kicked in. I get that. It's how do we manage that? But the example I'll give you, if I look at the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, on Monday through, we've closed on Mondays now. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, we will turn over anywhere from $700 to $950. Our wage bill, because we're still holding all our staff, is about $3,500 a day. So it sort of doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that this formula isn't a long-term formula. So at the moment, we've just got to sort of work through how we manage that and hold on to as many as we can. We've been fortunate enough a little bit in the sense that we've had some of our people decide to move on for different reasons. And I think this is where hospitality will probably have a few challenges going forward in the sense that the leakage in our sector of people going and retraining to do other things. As we all sort of know, hospitality, 23,000 businesses pre-COVID in New Zealand. We employed 173,000 staff. We're sort of thinking probably about 30% of that have probably moved out of the sector, which you totally understand. If there's no work, you can't just do it on, instead of doing 40 hours, you can't just do 20 and still pay rent, especially if you're in the major cities like Wellington and Auckland. So, yeah, so look, the Omicron, I think what I do think is we're sort of, if I look at, put my Hospitality New Zealand hat on, we're sort of hoping that we probably, in 3 or 4 weeks' time, it'll start to come back. Obviously, we peak, things start to go down, people start to come back out again. What I do see in our books going forward, I've just had a look at our bookings for conferencing. If I look at May, we're starting to see it sort of consolidate. But fingers crossed, if nothing else happens with Omicron, then from May onwards, it's looking fairly good for us, which is great. But the key is to be able to get to that point. So, yeah, look, that's probably our little story that's going on at the moment. It's tough for our sector. Cash flow is the key. If I look at our Pacifica business network and talk to our members there, our construction guys are finding it really difficult in a sense that, yes, construction's going gangbusters. In a sense, there's a lot of work in the pipeline and there is a lot of work going. As you'll be well aware, that supply chain piece is really, really difficult at the moment. JIB is basically on hold now for the next 14 weeks. So that's 3 months. What we are hearing is a lot of people have taken on tradies, in particular in the last sort of 3 months. There's not a lot for them to do. So the Sparkies will go into a job. That job, they can't sort of do anything because the builders haven't done anything because they haven't got enough supply. So they're all sort of put on hold. So what you're sort of seeing in the trades piece is a lot of the work is being deferred and pushed out. But the problem is these contractors are still having to pay for them. The other piece in that also is the fact that a lot of the work was based on contract pricing. So they've fixed the price. This is what it is. Things don't arrive. They had to extend that fixed price, but there's no money in between to cover that fixed price. So for those of our members who are good at negotiation, they can sort of fix that. But the ones who are the sole traders or in the partnerships where there might be 2 or 3 builders and they've set up a partnership or a sole trader, those guys are struggling in that sense around the supply chain. So there is some tension there. We haven't quite figured out how we can help a bit more with that piece, but we know the dialogue will be the piece that'll be important in that collaboration. The networks, probably one thing that COVID has been really, really good for the networks for Te Awa and Wellington Pacifica is just that whole collaboration piece. If COVID has taught us anything, if we're going to get through this, we've got to do it in a collaborative, informative way where we work together as a community and as a business structure. So for the last 2, probably Pacifica in the last 8 years and Te Awa in the last 24 years, we haven't really made the traction we wanted to get to with regards to having infrastructure. We got some funding, which was great in Te Awa many, many years ago, but we haven't been able to build it where we can have some people that stand alone. Anything that's a voluntary organisation, as a lot of you will be well aware of, it's only going to be as strong as the people who have got the passion and the drive to be able to do that. What we've identified is, at some point we have to produce some succession planning. Obviously, the Honourable Lord Manavau Dame Moni Labour can't be there for the rest of her life. She won't want to be, and nor will we. And Te Awa is in the same boat. So we're trying to figure out, well, how can we get this model of what we want to do where we can help grow our Pacific and our Māori businesses? How can we give them the skill sets that they need to be able to do their business with all those different hats that I discussed before? So what we've been doing in the last 10 months is we've been working with the Chamber of Commerce here in Wellington to be able to have a look at how we can sort of collaborate and cohabitate together. If I look at the Chamber, they've got 45 staff here in Wellington. Simon Arcus, who's the CE there, and their focus is business, which is brilliant. From our Pacifica side and our Te Awa side, we're going to bring on a couple of extra people to be able to help us. But if we were to house them by themselves somewhere in Wellington at a hot desk, what we do know is they'll probably get bored because they don't have that social interaction. They don't have that sort of that passion from other people, that sharing, that cohabitation. So what we're looking at doing with Chamber is we're sort of forming a relationship. What we're calling it is the power of 3. So Te Awa, Pacifica and the Chamber, and 3 lenses looking through 1. So next month in April, we're launching this collaboration that we're going to be doing together. And what I'm really excited about, it sort of helps that whole succession plan of what we want to be, where we want to be, making our network sustainable. So I'm really excited about that. It opens up a few doors, but probably the big thing it does is opens up those channels that we don't currently have, whether it's to central government, local government, but also to the business community, Business New Zealand, where it may be. So, but also from the Chamber perspective, what they will be receiving is those core values that we bring, those things that make us who we are. those things I talked about when that question I first posed is, how do we measure those core values that we have as Pacifica, as Māori, kotahitanga, wairuatanga, manaakitanga, our whole faith and community that Pacifica sort of live by. That's what we will be bringing to that chamber, because what we do know is when we look at all these corporates, it's funny how you hear these guys who come out with these sustainable ideas and all these sorts of things, and you have some young person come out with this fantastic idea of sustainability and all these things. And I look at it, and that's probably what our people have been doing for many, many years. And that gets highlighted over here, but yet on the Pacifica and the Māori side, that measurement isn't valued perhaps to where we believe it should be. So this collaboration of the Power of Three, we're really excited about. We're going to be launching it in April. And there's a number of things that we're going to be doing through expos, through awards regionally. And the good thing about this also is it's sort of a pilot to say, okay, this is how it worked. These are the runs. We might need to make a few tweaks, but it's something that we know that can be transferable to Auckland, to Christchurch, to wherever. But what we do know is that it means long term it'll help our people get to where we want to get to very, very quickly. Because if I look at the Pacifica side, we our parents and our grandparents moved here for that better life. This is the land of milk and honey. They came here for us to be able to have a better opportunity. And what we want to do is ensure that, that dial, whilst it hasn't moved for a very, very long time, whether that's in education or employment, even when we look at the average, that gender pay gap coming out today for International Women's Day, Pacifica, the mainstream was 10% below the male side. If you look at Pacifica, it was 27%. These numbers have not moved for a long, long time. And what I'm hoping is these things will be able to sort of be highlighted by all these different initiatives that we'll be able to bring through. So I'm really excited about that. So I just want to share that. The other things ongoing with the networks is that whole collaboration of information and data. Data, I think this time around through COVID is really, really important. And the example I'll give you is this. If I look at our cafe here in Wellington, for those of you who aren't based in Wellington, on a busy summer's day down at Karaka Cafe at Whariwaka, we would feed and water 2,000 people, up to 2,000 people. On any given day, 65% of those people were only came to our cafe once. So they were either domestic or international, mostly domestic visitors. And out of that 65%, they would spend 30% more than the regulars. So we always knew those guys were the ones that we wanted to get to. Wellington, if you know Wellington, 86% of the tourism market pre-COVID was domestic market. So when those borders closed, when I touched on, we came back a lot faster because we were domestic was mostly our gig anyway, other than the cruise ships coming in. So data is really important in that sense, but technology is really important as well. What we are seeing now is, if I look at our cafe at the moment on a busy summer's day, 50% of our orders that are coming through, they're ordered online, Mobi to go. So what does that mean? They come in, they sit on the grass. They don't necessarily want a waiter or a bar person to come up to them. They'll just grab their phone, order, scan the menu, order whatever it is they want. The docket comes to the main kitchen or goes to the bar, drinks automatically come in. They pay for it online. Everything's done. 50% on a busy summer's day is all coming through that. I must admit, I'm incredibly surprised with how those behaviours have changed. If we look at the baby boomers, they want to have that conversation. Baby boomers want to tell you how their grandkids are going. This is what they do. They want to have that interaction. If we look at Generation X, all we want to do is we just want to make sure our food's been ordered, our drinks are coming, and we're happy. But we're happy to have a wee chat as well. But if you look at Generation Y and Generation Z, they don't necessarily want any interaction at all. They just want to know that, yes, they've ordered it. They trust that system because it's come off their phone and they just want to get it and then they're happy to pay and then go. So I suppose what we're trying to do is, as sectors currently, is how are these things and behaviours going to change? What do we have to do to be able to embrace that more? So we have to upskill in a lot of the technology that we're getting, whether it's our tool systems, it's our apps, all those sorts of things that be able to help us be more innovative and a lot more productive. We've talked around productivity for many, many years here in Wellington, in New Zealand, sorry. We talk about productivity. When the borders closed, all of a sudden everybody got to understand, actually, we need to be more productive. So how do we do that? How do we do more with less? And that's the types of things that the initiatives that I think COVID has sort of made us aware that we've got to get fixated on productivity, how can we do more with less, and what's going to happen, what's the behaviours of customers, and obviously how can we change that piece that I touched on before around, we're in the hands of consumers' confidence. How can we help them be confident in what we're doing and the protocols and the systems and processes that we've got? So there's a range of things there from business owners that I've just touched on there. So yeah, it's an interesting time. I'm really pleased to see that. I think, like, if I look at our sector, hospitality, a lot of people, we have this perception, and quite rightly so, and I'm first put my hand up, that we were seen as poor payers. We didn't look after our people. We made them work long shifts. We didn't give them their breaks and all these sorts of things. My point to that, I would say, is that's probably 15% of our sector. And don't get me wrong, that's a lot of our sector. But I think what COVID has done is we've really sort of understood the value that we need to change that perception and that whole resilience piece. I look at all the work that you as government officials are doing now currently. You're all looking at resilience. I look at the whole piece that we're looking at doing, the transformational plan for tourism. All the employment plans for Māori, for wahine, for rangatahi, for our disabled, all these plans that are in play at the moment. So how can we make these areas more resilient? So I think as sectors, we're starting to understand that. We get that. We know in order for us to achieve what we've got to achieve, we've got to be better at what we're doing. So that 15% that I talked about that aren't perhaps playing in our sector fairly and looking after people quite like they should have, what we are starting to see is that sort of those boats are starting to rise with the rest of us in that tide, where we are looking at living wage. And a lot of us are paying living wage now. We are sort of looking at, okay, well, how can we reinvest in our people? Instead of having 5 staff on the bar, how can I do it on 3.5, but pay them more? So those are the sorts of conversations that are happening now, and we're starting to see that in our sector. So I'm really pleased about that. I know probably hasn't moved as fast as some people would like, but I think if we have a look at what the changes that have been made in that last 24 months of going through this COVID, it's been quite incredible, really. And I'm still amazed with how many of our businesses are still in play at this point. Obviously, those cash flow reserves that are all sort of gone down, and yet some of them are still standing. We're sort of interested to see what it's going to look like over the next 6 months, because we don't think a lot of them are going to be able to survive past that period. So look, I know I sort of touched on a lot there, and I know there's some questions that Sua's going to get to come through, and I hope I've been able to share just a bit of what we're going through at the moment as business owners. Some of it is incredibly, it can be incredibly hard work. As I sort of mentioned before, what I do like what we've done though is we have collaborated a lot better than what we have in the past. As a business community, whether it's in hospitality, construction, whatever it may be, we are talking a lot more, which is a good thing. And also the other thing too is we're starting to talk about, well, how can we make a more sustainable and a higher living wage? About 6 weeks ago, we had a meeting with some guys who are in Pickpock, so they're techie companies. So we're looking at setting up this new initiative that we want to roll out. And what that initiative looks like is, we talk about paying a higher wage, $100,000, whatever it may be. In hospitality, I can't pay $100,000. That's a given. I can't afford to pay that. I can pay it to a really, really good manager, but not necessarily to a barman or a wait staff member. So the challenges that we're having at the moment, when I was talking with Tyrone McCauley from Pickpock, he was saying the challenge that they've got is being able to retain staff, that attraction retention piece. The problem that they've got is a lot of the banks, Xero, government are poaching their people. They're paying them over $100,000 a year. Absolutely fantastic. But the problem is somebody over here is offering them another 40 or 50K. And they want to stay with them, but the problem is the housing unaffordability has become a problem. That 40 or 50K will help cover the mortgage. So we get that. So when I was talking to Tyrone, I was going, wow, that whole sort of future pipeline of staff is difficult. We also are struggling with regards to getting people coming through, borders closed. How can we fix that problem? How can we work together to come up with an initiative that will help satisfy you as well as us? The other problem that we have here in this country also is, at school level, when I was at Wellington College, we measured what happened when a kid, when that student left Wellington College. We measured where they went to for their first year, but nothing after that. So I remember I was talking to the DPs last year. I said, okay, so where are these kids going after their first year? Well, what would happen is 82% of our mainstream kids would leave Wellington College and leave with NCA 1, 2, and 3 in UE. Out of that 82%, 70% would go to tertiary education, so they go to university. Fantastic. Year 1, university. Year 2, only 50% of that 70% would go back for year 2. What a waste of time. So when I was talking with Tyrone, I was saying, hey, why don't we look at, the subject choice? Why don't we look at maybe you guys coming into the schools at year 10, talk to these kids, excite them what gaming can do, techie, whatever it may be, architect, get these kids excited to make sure they pick the right subjects at year 10, fourth form for those other ones who have been around a bit longer. And then that way these kids can pick the right subjects. These guys will come and motivate these kids to be able to stay at school and make sure they get those subjects. When they finish year 13, they then come to me at in the hospitality sector, or somebody in the hospitality sector. Then we will employ them, pay them a living wage, give them enough money to earn their rent and do everything else whilst they go to university for that 4 years to get that degree. And also the other thing is, what we will do is we'll teach them those soft skills, getting out of bed on time, turning up, making sure they can have a conversation, all those sorts of things. Then after 4 years, once they're finished with me, then they move on to the next guy, which is Tyrone, who can then have these guys and start to train them to be these gamers or whatever it is they're going to be. But then whilst they're with me for that 4 years, these guys will come in and mentor these kids to make sure they complete the university degree, because that's the other piece. What a waste of time if you don't complete it. So they'll complete it, then they get passed on, and that's an area that we can look at, that high value job. But this is where COVID, I think, has been really, really good in the sense of we're collaborating. I mean, who would have thought hospitality will get together with techies and try and figure out a new way of doing things? There's 900,000 students in New Zealand across the country. There is a lot. So getting to them at an earlier point is a really, really good thing. And this could be something that levels the playing field in my eyes. So look, in passing, that was just one initiative that also has come out of that. And with the networks, the good thing about the networks is we're always continuously looking at how can we do things better? What can we do to make the boat go faster? And a lot of it is short term, over that next 12 months. Unfortunately, most of it is sort of that sort of Horizon 2, Horizon 3 stuff. So it is longer term, but if we start now, it'll help us whatever the next shock is that's coming. So look, on that, I might pass back over to you, Sue, if you wanted to sort of facilitate questions. That's okay.
Whawhataita lava, Paul. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting journey you've led us through. There's been a number of questions. A couple of questions have come up. If I could start.
Sure.
The first one is from Sonia, who remembers you when you were at the Park Royal. Her question was really around what changes are happening in hospitality to adapt to the new normal. What do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Sonia. And hey, look, great to see you. Well, I'm not seeing you, but good to have you online. Look, I think what you're seeing is, I think a lot of the things, the initiatives that are coming in around the WDCs, the Workforce Development Councils, to be able to look at that training mechanism where it's learner-led and sector-led is a really, really good thing. Also with the hospitality, I think technology is starting to play a big piece now. We're all starting to understand the importance of technology, so we're starting to see that. But we're also understanding that we need to invest in our people better. We haven't done that for a long time, and I think I've touched on that a couple of times. So those three things alone, the training, the looking after people, and also understanding, because the other piece with hospitality sector as well is, I think what wasn't covered off in the last 2 years is a lot of the hospitality sector, because they are young working within our sector, a lot of them are flatting, they're not based in Wellington. The only whānau or ainga that they had was their workplace. So what we did find over that last 24 months that we've gone through is that whole work connection, connectivity, awhi wraparound has all come from the workplace. So yeah, in answer to your question, the three things for me, it's around the training piece, around the WDCs, it's around looking after our people better, but then also it's around paying more, which we are doing.
Thank you, Paul. The next question is from Nathan, who's thanking you for your leadership and resilience through these tough times. His question was really around how helpful was the wage subsidy for supporting your business and employees? And do you see the new New Zealand income insurance scheme that are being proposed as an alternative way to support the protection of your business and people in the future?
Yeah, look, the wage subsidy was a big piece. I think without the wage subsidy, I think the carnage could have been way worse. And look, that was welcomed by all sectors. It definitely stood us in a good light to be able to get through and brought us that time to be able to get through. The insurance piece, look, I think it's a great idea. My only piece to that is it's just around timing. At the moment, there's so much tension for costs coming through, whether it's through central government, whether it's in wage increases and all those sorts of things. There's significant tensions coming through. Then local government, you've got looking at rates going up. There's just a differential where in Wellington here, they're looking at the differential rate going from 3.7 to 3.2. That 0.5% will make a difference around our rents as business owners and things. So I think I think the insurance is a good thing, absolutely. It's just timing when it gets enacted.
Thank you, Paul. We have a question from Svetlana, who's asked around, who's acknowledged your great kōrero and agree around data and collaboration. And her questions are around the power of collaboration in business networks and how that could be measured so that we know the network support is going to where it really makes a difference.
Yeah, look, that's a great question because measurement's always the hardest thing. I mean, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So I totally get that. I think the measurement will come through once we get a real good optics on where are the Pacific businesses, where are the Māori businesses. I know MB have been doing some work and they came out recently in the last 6 months saying there's 10,000 Māori businesses. Pacifica, we don't have that data. And at the moment, I think by us having Chamber that has the infrastructure to be able to retain that, find it, dig deep for it, and go and find out where all those pieces are. That's why we're sort of doing that power of three, because they've got the infrastructure, we don't. And also the other piece of that is we don't want to hold an ivory tower. We've already got things in play. Ministry of Pacific Peoples are doing some fantastic work. We don't want to emulate what they're doing. Pacific Business Trust are doing some great things as well. We don't want to emulate what they're doing. What we're wanting to do is have a look at how can we collaborate with others that are doing things, and let's have a look at a different model to be able to do those things, those measurements that have just been brought through.
Thank you, Paul. We have a question from Iono Matthew regarding the wanting for you, if you could, to elaborate on the generational differences, particularly in the workforce. She's asking basically, is the next generation interested in permanent employment, or have they moved to the gig economy?
Yeah, look, they have. It's really interesting. That's a really good question. What we are seeing is, and I'm not quite sure how they survived, to be honest. I mean, back in our day when we were growing up, and a lot of you would have been going to university, you would have had a job, and you know, if somebody rang in sick, you'd automatically jump in and take the shift because you want to earn as much money as you can, because you wanted to buy a car, you wanted to buy flash clothes, whatever. What I'm really interested in at the moment is, and the fascinating thing that I see is a lot of our guys are happy to work 30 hours or 25 hours. They're not necessarily caught up in all those things of the nice to haves, I suppose. They're quite happy living their life over here, but for them, it's about work-life balance, and it's about their core values around connecting with their friends, which is really interesting. So, you know, what we are seeing now is we're having to, when we do interviews now, when we interview people, we interview for best fit. But then if they say, look, all I want to do is 20 hours, hey, sweet, we'll take the 20 hours. Whereas before, 5 years ago, no, you either do 40 hours or you don't. So we're starting to see that whole change of people's work, what they're wanting to do, what's important to them. And that core values piece that I've touched on a number of times, core values is so important to the way everything operates these days.
Thank you, Paul. That ends the questions I've got on the chat. I just have one question myself, Paul. You mentioned that that there are some business that you have observed is unlikely to survive in the next 6 months. Really keen to hear your views about if you were to give some advice to them about how they might become more sustainable. What sort of advice would you give them?
Yeah, look, I know there's so much work going on in that resilience piece. At the moment, it's really difficult because everybody's in a different situation. At the moment, the key is cash flow. The only thing that's going to get everybody through whatever they've got to get through is cash flow, and everybody's position currently right here, right now is different. At the moment, you know, the banks keep saying, yes, we're here to support, we're here to support. What I can say is a lot of our members don't even get their phone calls returned from the banks. Now, that could be for a raft of different reasons. I'm not sure what their history is and all the rest of it. But those ones who can't make it through, is there needs to be some, you know, some questions asked around, and this is what we're doing at Hospitality New Zealand at the moment. You know, we're trying to work through restructuring businesses at the moment. What support do they need? We're doing webinars on, okay, you're at a point now, you're not going to get any further, and we have to have some honest conversations around what that can look like. So we're having those discussions at the moment, but the only thing that can help businesses get through really is cash flow, to be honest with you. So the RSP that came out last week, that's been welcomed. Absolutely, every little bit will help.
I have a couple more, Paul, have come online. This is from Phil. He's acknowledged that you may have touched on this, but what he's really wanting to know is what you think government needs to think about, particularly for Māori and Pacific businesses, when it's strategizing for the economy as COVID becomes endemic. What difference? What is the difference between that and what the mainstream need?
Yeah, look, I think capital is the key. As I said before, cash flow is everything. Unfortunately for our Pacifica community, only 18% of us own our own house. So there's not a lot. So they don't have that equity to be able to go to the banks to get their phone calls returned. So the challenge that they've got is they just don't have what banks measure as, hey, this is successful or it's not. You know, a lot of businesses that are going to fail are great businesses, but they're just going to run out of cash. You know, it's the bloodline that gets the business going, that keeps the people going. And unfortunately for our people, and I touched on before, that housing piece is so important to banks. I mean, but also from government, just to make some hard calls. You know, I mean, I see the ComCom reports just come out around the supermarkets. You know, and it wasn't really. I mean, we know that there's been a duopoly for a long time, and this is a real opportunity to turn it on its head and say, actually, this is unacceptable. You know, having a duopoly is not good for business. It's not good for our people. It doesn't help our communities. But I think, and I haven't read the full report, and I look forward to having a chance to do that. But from what bits I have seen is we didn't go full on in there and make the changes that probably needed to happen. So, and answer your question from a government perspective, it'll be really interesting to see, you know, when there's an opportunity to make change. You know, I mean, another prime example is around, you know, capital gains tax. You know, I know we talk about that a long time, and there was an opportunity to really look at that. Well, probably a bit difficult under an MMP environment, but you know, for business, you know, you got capital gains, you can own a house, and that's where the banks have gone to. Whereas with businesses, they don't necessarily fund us to be able to be successful, employ people. That's the challenge in my view.
Thank you, Paul. Don has just posted a question. Whakalawhalai atu, Paul. Don's question is sort of three parts to his question. First, do you value the influence of non-executive directors or external shareholders? The second part of that is the number of Pacific businesses is nationally comparatively small. How can we leverage great ideas nationally? And then the last part of the question is really asking about the three lenses example you used. Is that a key element to leveraging great ideas nationally? And finally, his last part of that is who inspired you throughout your career?
Yeah, those are big questions. Hey, thanks for those. Hey, look, external shareholders, absolutely. I mean, external shareholders can be helpful, absolutely. And they can be helpful in a sense whether it's capital or whether it's experience and knowledge and advice that they bring. So, you know, as long as you've got good shareholders that are sort of come in with good credibility, I suppose, is probably the thing I'd say there. The three lens example, absolutely. It's for us, again, the way I've sort of framed it up is it gives us steroids for where we want to get to quickly. You know, as I sort of mentioned before, on our Pacifica, our journey's been 8 years. For our Māori business network, we've been out for 24 years, and we still sort of not limped along, but we haven't got to where we need to get to. This will give us some true sort of tools in the kite to be able to get to where we need to get to on a fast basis, but also for us to be able to measure it and bring the right people on board, but also have those channels to have those conversations. You know, the example I'll give you is obviously from a MOF perspective, every year the Chamber of Commerce has a pre-budget breakfast with the minister. Well, this year it's Deloitte's the sponsor, but it's going to be the Chamber, Te Awa, and Wellington Pacifica Business Network. You know, this is the week before the budget comes out. I mean, we would never have seen that, you know, in the last 30 odd years. So these are little small tweaks, but before what will happen is it will normalise that. Inspiration for me, yeah, look, for me, it's really, I mean, our parents came here with a, you know, with a dream of a better life, and our inspiration is for them. My wife, who's a big part of it, Kerry, we just do what we do, and we've got 7 children. So we have 7 children, 2 grandchildren. Everybody still lives at home. So for us, our inspiration, we get to share and see that every day. So that's what we get out of bed for every day.
Thank you, Paul. The Hyung have just posted something, a question regarding your thoughts regarding how we could better integrate alternative or new approaches into our way of doing business, as well as in policy development. And she's alluding to approaches that could include indigenous perspectives, for example, Pacific perspectives, He Ara Waiora, or new economics, for example, complexity systems thinking and futures thinking?
Yeah, look, I think there's some real opportunity, and I think I started off that before, is how do we measure success in business? And I think, we looked at the mainstream side, which is look at the balance sheet, whereas with our side, it's around those core values of, we're focused on inputs, not necessarily outputs. There's room for both, but the only way to be able to embed that or bring those good ideas and capture some of those really nuggets of gold that we always wanted to get to is by doing this, having Talanoa, getting people around the table, no personal agendas. It's about the greater good. How do we help this achieve this where it's going to be something that we're going to be able to say in 20 years' time, we can say that made a difference. And I think and there's a lot of our people, Māori, Pacifica, Palangi, there's a lot of really clever young ones coming through. I think we've got to get them around the table. We don't have to have the same old people around the table all the time, because otherwise we just end up with the same ideas, having the same Talanoa, but when we do get to the table, it's not about having a seat at the table. It's not about, being, it's about being heard at the table. And it's about, those are the key discussions and those are the things that we do in our networks, just generally, and that's why that lens of three, I think, is really important and powerful for us.
Thank you, Paul. Just going back to Don's question, there's a point that he also asked, which I've just noted. As the number of Pacific businesses nationally is comparatively small, how can we leverage the great ideas nationally? Yeah,
look, I think that's where the collaboration of we need to stop looking. I mean, at the moment, I know I'm talking regionally for Wellington, but the key factor around it is we need to somehow get out of the silos, and perhaps this is where central government can help. I've always said that, in Wellington, we've got great energy here, and I know Auckland does, and Christchurch does, and Dunedin does, and all the big cities, but also the regions. But I think we've got some really good people here with some great ideas that really want to share whatever they do. I think the key is about bringing people together to be able to leverage those, because I think this whole Power of Three, this initiative that we're looking about with the tech guys, these are private sector driven. It's not coming from the government arm. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that was a good idea. These are private sector. We will want it to succeed, so we'll make it succeed at all costs. Do you know what I mean? So I think the more we get the buy-in from those parts and making it more private sector led, the better it'll be.
Thank you, Paul. John Faitala has just posted something thanking you for your generosity and saying that one of the many challenges faced by Pacific businesses is managing expectations and obligations to community, and he's making reference to whalawalavas and so forth. How should Pacific businesses look to manage these obligations?
Yeah, look, that's always going to be a problem, I think, for Pacifica, and I think because it's naturally in our DNA to give. We are judged on not by what we have, but it's by what we give. So I get exactly what John's saying. I think what we have to do, though, is we have to be really clever and clear about who we bring on board. We want people that are going to help grow our business. It doesn't necessarily need to be our cousin, our brother, our sister. This has to be longevity. So again, it's about putting a plan down in place to be able for the ainga to understand, actually, in order for this to stand up, it's going to be a 2-year plan, a 3-year plan, and then this is the 5-year plan. When we get to 5 years, we'll be able to do those sorts of things. But people need to understand what that plan is.
Thank you, Paul. Silvana has just asked again if you could repeat the names of businesses in Wellington region that you mentioned, the game company and the track company. She's keen to know more about their business journeys.
Yeah, so there's PICPOC, which is the gaming company, PICPOC, P-I-K, POC, P-O-K. There was Wellington Pipelines, which is based out in Wainuiamata, and Circuit Systems, which is Luke Meredith. But there's a number of other really successful businesses that are doing well, but those are the three that I just touched on.
And there's a comment from Kara who's saying that when you're talking about tweaking, that these are important movements to normalize so many things, and it talks about breaking the bias is for all of us, and so she's highlighting the importance of tweaking is sort of underrating how important those little changes can be in the long term. And let me just. Yeah, and Angela has supported your comment around initiatives driven from the private sector.
Nice.
That appears to be the questions, Paul, whawhataite lava. It's been a very interesting dialogue this afternoon, talanoa this afternoon, and I'd like on behalf of the audience and also myself personally to say thank you very much for the time that you've given to this. I know that you're a busy person, and that we're privileged to have you give this talanoa to us this afternoon. So on that note, Paul, I will now close off our chat and also our presentation. And thank you very much for taking malo lava sangoi lau sunga Paul.
Oh, whawataite lava. Thank you, Sue. And thank you, everybody. Great to talk. Appreciate the opportunity. Whawataite lava. Pa support.
Pa support.